Okay, thank you so much for staying for the next speaker. We will be listening to Ksenia Turkova, who is a journalist for Voice of America, and she has had over 20 years of experience at Russian and Ukrainian news outlets. She is also a linguist with a doctorate in philology and has been a guest lecturer at multiple US universities and was a professor at Moscow University. Her 2017 book, No Stress Russian, focused on making the language accessible to novice language learners. She is the author of a number of articles about how current events affect speech. Ksenia Turkova is a member of the expert committee of the Word of the Year contest also. The title of her presentation is War and Propaganda, Russia's Narratives About the Invasion of Ukraine. And I thank her very much for coming and speaking to us. She came from Washington, D.C.
Thank you so much for having me. I will start with telling you a couple of words about myself, besides what has been already said. I'm a journalist for Voice of America now, and I moved to the United States in 2017 from Ukraine. I lived in Kyiv, Ukraine for 4.5 years, and before I lived in Moscow, and I started my career in Moscow, where I worked for different news outlets, mostly private, actually only private news outlets and news TV channels. Working in Moscow as a TV host and as a reporter for the news channels, I was witnessing how the situation with media in Russia was gradually changing. And how Russia actually came to what they have now, with all the censorship and repressions against the independent media, because it didn't happen overnight. It was happening gradually, and I can tell you a lot about that because I was witnessing that as a journalist working for private TV channels, and actually the first TV channel I worked for. It was maybe the most popular and influential news TV channel at the end of 90s and early 2000s, NTV, and it was very famous TV channel. All journalists in Russia were dreaming to work there. I started there as an intern in 2000, in year 2000, when Putin came to the power. And in 2001, after only 1 year of my work there, this TV channel was overtaken by the state oil company Gazprom. And after that, the part of our team started a new channel, TV6, that was also closed, shut down because of the censorship. And then the next channel we started was also closed because of the censorship. So I worked for the number of media that were always like persecuted or shut down or closed, and it was already clear that the situation is not good with media in Russia. Even in the early 2000s, we saw those signs, and I will tell you a little bit about that as well. And so in 2013, I moved to Ukraine because I got a job offer from Ukraine to create a new radio station, news and talk radio station. And I moved there with some of my Moscow colleagues. They used us as experts because they actually didn't have news and talk radio station in Ukraine, and they wanted to apply that experience in the country. And so we moved there in 2013. We were thinking we were moving only for 1 year, but then the Revolution of Dignity happened, Maidan, and I decided to stay in Ukraine. We launched this radio station that was very successful. I learned Ukrainian language and I speak fluently, so now I work both in Russian and in Ukrainian for Voice of America. Then I worked for one of the TV channels in Ukraine called Hromadsky TV, and it's a public TV channel and website and multimedia media resource. And then I got a job offer from Voice of America, and I moved to the United States. So I have strong connections, you know, both with Russia and with Ukraine, and I know a lot about both countries. And I'm also a philologist. I have PhD in philology, language and literature, and my field of study is texts of media. So I research media texts, and specifically propaganda and so-called newspeak and political language, and yes, how the current events affect our language and our everyday speech, and I will talk about that a little bit as well. So to start with, I created this presentation some time ago, but every time I give a lecture about propaganda, I changed it a little bit, because we have a lot of events, a lot of things going on now, so every time I add something relevant and actual into this presentation. And I want to start, something happened. I wanted to start with something that, with the event that happened yesterday. So I will show you the picture and you will understand what. No, I don't think it's a cyber attack from Russian. Well, I will tell you first, and then you will see the picture, because it's very important to see the picture. Yesterday, a Ukrainian and American photographer, Evgeny Malaletka, got an award, World Press Photo Award, for his picture of a pregnant Ukrainian woman in Mariupol. You probably have seen that picture. It's a picture of a woman and several men are carrying her out of the maternity hospital, and she is unconscious, and we can see the building of that hospital bombed. Everything is destroyed around, and so he got, he actually, it's not his first award, he got an award for the series of photos from Mariupol. And yesterday he got the award for that particular picture, and I wanted to show that picture to you to start with, because it has to do, it has something to do with propaganda. Well, I will tell you the story while we are waiting, because when that happened, that shelling of maternity hospital in March of 2022. The main narrative in the Russian media was that it was all staged. If you have seen those pictures, you can understand that it cannot be staged. I don't know, even if Steven Spielberg came to Mariupol and staged all of it, it wouldn't be possible. Because it was all destroyed. There were real people killed and wounded and suffering. You can't fake it. But in Russia, on all state TV channels and in the state media newspapers, they were telling people that it was all staged, that the hospital was not working. There were like military people there, the Ukrainian Nazis, as they call them. And there were no civilians, no women, and they even found one of the, I actually have two pictures, and I hope I can show them to you. So there was another photo of another pregnant woman going downstairs. You probably have seen that photo of the young girl, also pregnant, and we see that the building inside is also partially destroyed, and she's going downstairs with some people. And so in the Russian media and on social media as well, they spread that narrative that another girl who was going downstairs, she's a beauty blogger. They found her Instagram account, and she was a beauty blogger in Mariupol. But based on that fact that she was a beauty blogger, they were saying that she did some makeup, and that's why it was all staged, because she's a beauty blogger. And the other woman, unconscious, that I mentioned before, they were saying that it was the same woman. Like, same woman, just different clothes, different makeup. Although we know that the first woman going downstairs, she survived and her child survived, who is a beauty blogger. And unfortunately, the second woman didn't survive and her child didn't survive. So from the beginning it was known that there were two different people, two different women, but in Russia they were, and I do remember how when we were posting news about that on Voice of America, every time we posted something about that bombardment of Mariupol Maternity Hospital, dozens of bots, trolls on internet, they came to the comments and were saying the same thing. It was all staged. She's a beauty blogger. It was all staged. She's a beauty blogger, and it was like copy paste of the same, almost of the same text. And throughout the war, we have seen that each time that something like that happened, like in Mariupol, or for example when they bombed the railway station in Kramatorsk, or that center mall in Vinica, and a lot of situations like that. Each time they said that it was whether staged or it happened, but there were no civilians. And from the beginning of Russia's invasion of Ukraine, the Russian state media were has been creating the whole new reality, because we can talk about propaganda, and I usually hear from people a lot like, oh, there is propaganda in every country, and it is true, yes, there is some propaganda in every country, but usually when people say that, they mean that some media are biased. Do we have like biased media in the United States? Yes, we do. We do have biased media. Or people talk about some twisted reality. But now, especially after the war started, we cannot talk anymore about the twisted reality in Russia. We can talk about like the whole different reality. It's an alternative reality. They have a special vocabulary for that. They have special words, coverage, pictures, like they have been creating it from scratch, like a different reality.
Connection has been restored.
Yes, oh, thank you so much. So let's look at those pictures. This is the woman who didn't survive, and this is the photo that Evgeny Maloletka got an award for yesterday. He is a photographer for Associated Press news agency. And this is another woman who is a beauty blogger. And there were a lot of fact-checking materials proving that it was not staged, with all the proofs, numbers, and other things. So it was proved by dozens of independent sources in different countries. Also, when the Bucha massacre happened, they used the same narrative. They said that it was all staged, and those bodies were fake. Like they went there and they put fake bodies on the road, and even they spreaded one video where, as they said, you could see the body moving, like the car is passing by and the body is moving behind. But it was not moving, because there was also a fact check after that. It was not moving, it was like a mirror reflecting something, like the body was not moving at all. And I looked at that video several times and I was trying to slow it down to see like any sign of, no, there's no sign of body moving or anything like that. But even my friends, former friends from Russia, former colleagues, very well-educated people, like heads of some companies, they, after I posted news from Bucha on my Facebook page, they said, don't fall for fakes, don't fall for fake news, don't believe in fakes. So they, well-educated people, they still believed in that. So as I said, we have to say about some kind of creating a new reality. And I will show you the video I made for my YouTube channel about how some of those fakes were being created. And let me actually, maybe, yes, this is the video. But I can't go from there, right? From here.
Try to just move like a mouse and see if you can click on the touchpad.
Oh, okay, let's try.
See, no, it doesn't. So then we have to get out of the PowerPoint.
Maybe I should go here because it's not
right.
Okay.
This one?
Yeah.
Hi, I'm Ksenia Turkova. You asked me to do more videos on debunking Russian propaganda, and here is one unbelievable story that happened in April. Well,
I'm sorry, the sound is not very good. But it doesn't go here.
Right? So when the world found out.
Well, then we need again the tech guy. Yeah.
I'm sorry about that.
Yeah, I don't know their connections for the sound.
Okay, so there was one video, and I think it was right after Bucha happened. They showed on one of the Russian state TV channel. They showed a video of so-called. They claimed they were Ukrainian military, like doing a makeup on some dead body or a fake body. I'm sorry, on some fake body. And they say, you see, they are preparing that body to be put somewhere in Bucha or other cities in Kiev district. But then, what happened? They showed it on one of the state Russian TV channels, and one of the film directors of the Russian series, Russian TV series, she recognized her video. She filmed in one of the Russian cities. And it was a fake body, but it was like a criminal series about some criminal series, and they made this body specifically for that series, and they threw it out of the window, so the body fell on the car, on the roof of the car. Then they were doing some makeup and stuff, and she recognized it. And I called her and I recorded her saying, well, it's my video, I'm going to sue the channel that showed, but it didn't end well. She actually had to leave the country, and now she lives in Germany. Not because of that reason, but because of many reasons. She was also a volunteer, and she was helping Ukrainian refugees to get out of Russia, where they were forcefully brought. So that's why she left Russia. And we can go without video.
Yeah,
I'm sorry.
I'm waiting for the tech person. I don't know what's going on.
Maybe at the end of the talk, I can show some videos if someone can help us. Because I have several videos. Because I think it's very important to see what is really going on Russian TV. Because I think here a lot of people, they don't understand to what extent this propaganda works, and sometimes it's to the extent you can't even imagine. You cannot even imagine. It's total dehumanization of the whole country, the whole nation, and so on. So it's very important to see those pieces as videos. But actually, this one is not. I
Yeah,
talked
the link-
about it
the
a
link,
little bit.
that's important. So it shows
Let
the
me
power-
continue.
it shows the PowerPoint, but not the videos.
Okay. So as I said, Russian state media are creating the alternative reality, like in series Stranger Things, we have Upside Down, and that is what is going on in Russia now. Now, before I start talking about the main narratives of Russian propaganda about Ukraine and about Ukrainians and about war, and the main tools they use, because as a philologist I analyze the words they use and the rhetorical tools. But before, I wanted to mention one book maybe you will be interested in. There is a famous Russian writer, contemporary writer called Dmitry Glukhovsky. He also had to leave Russia because there was a criminal case against him open, and he was persecuted by Russian government because of criticizing the war. Several years ago, I think it was before the pandemic, yes, because I was listening to that book during pandemic, he wrote this book called The Outpost. And actually, it's a book about propaganda. You can find it in English.
She can
It's about Russia in the future, when some kind of civil war happened, and Russia is not that big anymore, divided into several, not countries, but just some parts of Russia that are fighting with each other. And there is the center in Moscow, and there is Tsar at that time in his book. And so they created some kind of special prayer. When people hear that prayer, they become absolutely crazy and they kill each other. And the only way to avoid this special prayer that turns you into an animal, that makes you crazy, is to gouge your ears. So it's the only way to fight this. Otherwise, you will become like all other people who heard it. And I think it's a very, very good picture of propaganda and to what extent it developed in Russia now, because you cannot resist it. It's very difficult for people to resist it because it's everywhere. Independent media are shut down, and some people, for example, in like rural area or little towns and villages, they don't have anything except one or two TV channels, and they have only this picture. Internet is also like closely, gradually closing, like Facebook and Instagram. They are considered extremist resources, and so stuff like that. And now I see it by talking to my relatives or my friends or my former colleagues. I see how that turns people into zombies sometimes, because they don't even want to understand what is really going on, and they believe in everything they hear from state TV. Now we can show it. It's
Okay.
not connected to the screen.
Yes. Just a second.
It's okay, I can go on with this, but I will have 3 more videos at the end.
Okay.
Okay. So I think this is a very good metaphor of propaganda, and if you're interested, you can find this book on internet. And this is a very good picture I like. In Russian, it says, "You are lying about everything, but I believe you." And the person is sitting in front of the TV screen, and he is like angry at people who are telling him something, but at the same time he is like, "Yes, you're lying, but I believe you." And that's how it works very often. So as I said, the situation was not. The situation didn't change overnight. Sorry, I will skip this slide because it was I wanted to talk about it a little bit later, and it was the wrong slide. I'm sorry. So I will talk a little bit about how Russia's propaganda statements and narratives about Ukraine has been changing since 2004, when the Orange Revolution, so-called Orange Revolution, happened in Ukraine. And even then, almost 20 years ago, they used the same narratives they use now, but now they have more narratives, so that list is growing. They started from, the main narratives were the revolution was backed or even initiated by the US and Western countries. So they were trying to tell people in Russia that protest cannot be inspired by people themselves. So you cannot just go on the streets when you don't like something and you want to say no to something, to protest. You might be bribed or you might be inspired in a bad way, like by someone. And they have been using that narratives for years, showing that it can be sincere, your protest can be sincere. They used the same narrative actually about the mass protests in Russia in 2011-2012. They said the same thing. And the activists were bribed, the activists were drugged, and now on Russian TV, since the beginning of the war, you could hear, if you watched Russian TV, you could hear almost every day that Zelensky is using drugs. I don't know why they using that story, that narrative, but almost in every news review program, they say that Zelensky is drugged. And people who support him, they are like sick or drugged or something like that. So for some reason they use this motive. And again, it shows us what it can tell us, that people cannot be sane. If they're protesting, that there might be some bad reason. Then the narratives changed a little bit. So the new narratives appeared in 2014, and that was the time I lived in Ukraine already. So I saw how it was developing. Because I moved just a year ago, before 2014, and I was a radio host on radio, so I was on air every day for 4 hours. I had an afternoon show, so I talked to people a lot in Russian and in Ukrainian, and so I know what people were thinking, and I also got a lot of feedback that time from my Moscow relatives and co-workers, and that was the time actually when I lost a lot of friends. So now, when the full-scale war started, very often people ask me, like, how you probably lost a lot of people, lost a lot of friends, connections, and I said I actually went through that 8-9 years ago already. Because I was in Ukraine. I moved to Ukraine, and some people in Russia, for example, after the annexation of Crimea, knowing that I didn't support it, they just stopped the relationship with me. And so, and I'm not unique. A lot of people are like that. I was seeing how those narratives were changing and growing, and that list was growing. So again, they said the revolution was backed by the Western countries. The activists were bribed, the activists were drugged. That they said that all people on Maidan Square, the central square in Kyiv, and by the way, I lived right in the central square. The building was right next to it. So I've seen everything that happened there. And they said that all people there were like drunk. They were only people, like poor people, came from different regions. They are drunk there. They're not doing anything, without job, homeless, like something like that. Again, trying to push that narrative that normal person cannot protest. And also, when the invasion of Donbass started, they added one more narrative. Ukrainians are bombing themselves, and they use it till now. So they were saying that they did it, not us. The Ukrainian president is a failure. That's what they said about Petro Poroshenko at that time. And on Russian TV, you could see a lot of newspapers criticizing, for example, like how he looked, what suit he was wearing. And I do remember one piece on, I think it was a state Russian TV channel, Russia 24. They said, I don't remember well, maybe Russia 24 or NTV, they said that Petro Poroshenko, during one of his visits in some country, I don't remember where exactly, they noticed a hole in his sock. And so they showed it, they zoomed it in, and they dedicated, the whole piece to Poroshenko's sock. And that's how they talk about appearance, physical conditions. So the things you wouldn't actually talk about, they are not relevant, and it's not ethical to talk about people like that. But that's all tools they use while talking about other presidents, and not only about Poroshenko and now Zelensky. They talk they talk like that about Biden and about European leaders and about many other people. So Ukrainians are bombing themselves. Ukrainian president is a failure. Ukraine can't survive without Russia. And here they use, and they still they have been using that brotherly nation concept. This concept, they borrowed it from the Soviet time, when Stalin was the father of the nations, and the nations were like brothers, although Russia, was a big brother, and other nations were a little bit oppressed by that brother in the languages and cultures and so on. And so they continue to push that narrative about brotherly love. They say we are brothers, but what I noticed in the last maybe several months, maybe the last part of that year of the war, they started to decrease that concept, because it doesn't work, and people you can't say at the same time that all Ukrainians are Nazis and like you need to hate them, and on the other hand you are saying they're our brothers. It doesn't add up. So at some point they created so much hate against Ukraine and Ukrainian people that they probably understood that it doesn't work anymore. So now it's not used as much as that used to be in the past. But still, it still exists.
While we have the tech person here, maybe you can try one of those videos. Try one of those videos.
Yeah, well,
He can help you with the sound.
yes, but I want to go to the next slide, but I can't. So when the full-scale war started in 2022, the list of those narratives grew even more. Before I go to that new list, I will tell you, some of you know that already, that in 2014, the year I was just talking about, appeared maybe the most famous propaganda meme, Russian propaganda meme called "Crucified Boy." And it became a symbol of Russian fake news and propaganda. Because in 2014, after the invasion of Donbass, they released on one of the TV channels, it was Channel First, the main state TV channel in Russia. There was a news story, video story, about how the Ukrainian military, they crucified 3-year-old boy in front of the people in Slavyansk, in Donetsk Oblast. And there was some witness, a woman who was saying, like crying, saying, I saw with my own eyes how they crucified that little boy wearing only underwear in front of a lot of people in the central square. Of course, it never happened. And some independent journalists came to that region, and they made a research, investigation, and they found out that that woman was not a local who really witnessed something. She was a wife of one of the leaders of those military, pro-Russian military groups. So she was, I don't know how it happened with the journalist, maybe she just told a story, and it wasn't the journalist initiative. Maybe that woman just wanted to push a story like that on the Russian TV. So it was proved that it was a lie, it was fake news, and you can find even a Wikipedia page now called Crucified Boy, where you can find the whole story, and became a symbol of fake news. They even admitted that they said that, oh, we just didn't control well that correspondent who went to cover this, to make this story. We didn't know, so we just didn't do enough, like fact check. But the story still you can still find it. So they didn't remove it, and they didn't apologize like publicly about that. So nothing of that happened. And then the main narratives, if we're talking about the main narratives of Russian propaganda in 2022, we have the same thing. The revolution was backed by the Western countries, and actually now they are talking, at some point even Putin started to say the word war, because in the beginning, for several months, the word war itself was banned. And you can even go into prison if you say war instead of special operation. You can get 15 years in prison for that. But at some point, even Putin started using that word, but in a different context. When he is talking about war, he's talking about war between Russia and the whole other world. He says that it's like international, like a world war, and the whole world is against Russia. Russia is trying to keep the world sane, and the rest of the world is trying to fight Russia. So now he's representing this war as a war against Russia and NATO and like other countries, different Western countries and organizations. Also, again, the activists were bribed, drugged and stuff, and Ukrainians are bombing themselves or staging the atrocities. The Ukrainian president is a failure. Ukraine can't survive without Russia. They need Russia. As I said, Russia is fighting with NATO, not with Ukraine, and NATO wants to pull Russia apart. That is one of the main narratives now. To destroy it and to turn Russian children into perverts. And you know, that is funny and not funny at the same time, but they use this narrative all the time, and almost in every speech Putin talks about that, saying the Western society is degrading, and Russian society keeps the great traditions, and on the West they don't have mom and dad anymore. They have parent number 1 and parent number 2. And he talks about that all the time. So it's something that bugs him. I don't know why. It's maybe for the lecture of some psychologist who can analyze why Putin is so attached to this topic. I don't know. but I can only, as a linguist, as a philologist, I can only notice that he uses it a lot, and he says a lot of things like that. By the way, before the war, several days before the war, he always uses some sexually inappropriate jokes or connotations or referrals, and sometimes it's very weird. Right before the war started, he said he used the phrase from one of the Russian punk group songs, and that punk group song is about necrophilia, and he used the line from that song saying, whether you like it or not, you need to tolerate it, saying about Ukraine. Whether you like it or not, I will do what I want with you, the meaning is. And when people heard that, they were like, well, he's using the line from the song about necrophilia. So, and it's like some abusive connotation, and that shows his real attitude to other countries, to countries from the former Soviet Union, that he wants to dominate, that he wants to oppress them, abuse them, and do what he wants to do. So now I want to go to the main tools. Russian, that will be very useful now. Now we're going to the main tools of Russian propaganda, and this is my favorite part as a philologist. One of the main tools, and I think it's probably the base of everything now, euphemization, or covering bad things with good names, if we use the simple language. So they ban the word war and say special operation. They don't say invading, they say liberation. And that's very interesting. If you read Russian and Ukrainian media, you can notice using the same words but in absolutely different meanings. For example, when Russian military take over some city or town, they say they liberated that city. And when Ukraine takes it back, they also say they liberated that city. But the difference is that Ukrainians really liberate because it's their land. They take it back, their town or city. And Russians use it as a euphemisms. And there is the whole dictionary of euphemisms they use for different situations. For example, if you remember that story and you know that meme about Russian warship, go F yourself, one of the main memes of the war. It was in the beginning of the war when they came to that Snake Island, and the Ukrainian military heard that it was a Moscow warship. They said Russian warship, and you know the ending. Then they got captured, but then and released after all. But that Russian warship, it sank, and but before that. They actually stepped back from that island, and when they stepped back from that island, they said they were forced by Ukrainians. They had to, but they said in Russian media they used the phrase gesture of goodwill. They said we did a gesture of goodwill, and it's another euphemism to cover what really happened. And as I said, it's the whole vocabulary. Everything, every little thing has its euphemism now for telling people about what is going on. Liberation or helping brother nations. And so these are the main tools: overloading audience with information, mirroring or reflecting, and hate speech. And I will talk a little bit about each of them. So let me go to that euphemization part. Every time they bomb civilians, they say that was a high precision strike. And if it was a high precision strike, civilians wouldn't be dead or wounded, right? And every time it happens, if you can analyze, you can pick any event related to bombing civilian objects, like Kramatorsk I mentioned, Mariupol Maternity Hospital, Vinnytsia, and so on. The list is big. And every time they said it was a high precision strike. They are saying we didn't do any harm to the civilians because it was high precision strike. But with time, when people understood that it doesn't add up, and actually they use it every time when civilians die, it became like a synonym of aggression. So when you say high precision strike, it immediately has this association with aggression and with civilians dying. That was another euphemism they use a lot. And there was a funny funny meme about bavovna. I don't know. I know that one person for sure knows about that in this audience. Who knows about bavovna? So bavovna in Ukrainian is cotton material, cotton. In Russian, it's the different word, хлопок, хлопок. And in Russian, we have two words that spells the same. They have the same spelling, but they have different pronunciation. We have хлопок as a material, and we have хлопок as a sound, as a clap. So the difference is in stressed syllable. And on internet, some of the Russian trolls, bots, they were trying to pretend Ukrainians, and they were trying to write something in Ukrainian. But obviously they used Google Translate, and Google Translate doesn't see the stresses on the syllables. So the Google Translate translated хлопок as хлопок, bavovna. And now I will explain what it means. So that's how people knew it was not a Ukrainian person writing, because they're absolutely different word. What does it mean хлопок in Russian newspeak, propaganda language? It's another euphemism. Each time there is some explosion in Russia, on Russia's territory, they use the word хлопок. They don't say explosion. They say хлопок or loud sound. Because they don't want to tell people the truth and to show that really like some explosion happened. So they use хлопок in Belgorod, on the border with Ukraine. And so they use a lot of things like that, and хлопок is one of the main euphemisms in that dictionary of vocabulary of war. That's why they were discussing some хлопок, some хлопки explosions on the Russian territory. And translating it, while translating it, they got this Ukrainian word, and it became a meme. And now you can even find it online in Urban Dictionary, as you can see, and read about it. And in Ukrainian media, they use it a lot, like ironically. They say another bavovna happened, another explosion. It means some explosion on Russian territory. And I usually, when I talk about it, I have I forgot to bring this T-shirt. I have a T-shirt with хлопок, with the flour, cotton flour, because it became very popular. People buy it, and now they say that the best flour for the Ukrainian girl is cotton flour. So that became one of the memes of the war. So that was euphemization part, creating the whole new language. Like in Orwell, in Newspeak, they created war as a peace, and peace as a war, and so on. Another tool is loading. This is another meme, you can read that line. And this is based on euphemization, by the way. This is what it says. So another tool they use is loading people with information. What does it mean? Here is the guy from the Ministry of Defense, Russian Ministry of Defense, and each day he gives his report about what is going on. And his speech is very, very monotone, like he speaks fast, monotone, and he gives a lot of numbers and names. So we took this and that village, and we destroyed so many tanks and Ukrainian weapons. And a normal person, when you hear him, a normal person cannot remember all this information. You cannot remember dozens of names and how many tanks, and combine them together and make some research at the same time. So you can't check him. You're just sitting in front of TV and he's loading you with that with the information. But what happened? The independent Russian media, Russian-speaking media, they're not based in Russia anymore for the obvious reasons. They called Project, and I highly recommend them. They have very high quality investigations. It's called Project, like project in English, project, in Russian Project. Project Media, and they have English versions of their articles as well. So they did some research. They listened to all the speeches of that Igor Konashenkov, the representative of the Russian Ministry of Defense. They wrote down all the numbers and names, and they did some analytics based on that, and they found out that, first of all, he named the cities or villages that not even exist in Ukraine, or the whole regions, like new names. Secondly, he was claiming that Russia destroyed that many weapons that Ukraine didn't have, so more than they had. And the third conclusion was that they captured the same towns or villages several times. It means we can't even know whether they captured them or not. Because, for example, he reported about capturing Kremena in Donbass for 4 times. But since we never know about Russia stepping back from that Kremena, we don't even know what was going on. Maybe they never captured it, or maybe they captured it once and then he was just repeating it to show the success of Russian army. And this is a very, very simple tool, but it works because, again, as I said, a normal person can't physically remember that information, but at the same time they have an impression that something significant happened. So you are listening to that load of information, and you're like, oh, Russian military, they're like having some success now. But you can't analyze it at the same time. You just have this impression of something significant is going on, and it's based on that fact that people can't check it. You need to do a special research to check it. So I put this question, what is this about? Because if you read those lines without knowing who said them, you might think that it's maybe some international organizations, representatives, they were talking about Ukraine, about people are killed, tortured, thrown into prison. Maybe something said it about Russia, because it looks like something in Russia, bombing hospitals and schools. Maybe someone was talking about, but no, these are all quotes from Putin's speeches, and he was talking about Ukraine. And we can see here the third tool I was going to talk about, called mirroring or reflecting. So he uses the same, absolutely same words and lines and phrases they use against him. When they say, when international leaders and organizations said that Russia is bombing civilians, Putin said that Ukrainians are bombing civilians, that in Ukraine there is no freedom of speech, they throw people into prison, they ban some media or some political parties, and so he uses absolutely the same language. Sometimes it's the same words. It looks like a quote, but he's just reflecting it. And it was very well said, I would say, when he met Biden before the war. They had several months before the war. They had this conversation, and Putin said, no, it was I'm sorry, I mixed it up. So you remember that situation when some journalist asked Joe Biden, "Do you think Putin is a murderer?" And Biden said, "Mm-hmm." And so a lot of people, a lot of media quoted that. And when Putin knew about that, he said a very popular kids expression. Кто так обзывается, тот сам так называется. It's difficult to translate, but I forgot the English equivalent. That sticks on you. I'm a glue that sticks on you. What is the whole expression? I forgot.
Whatever you say.
Whatever you say, yes, sticks on you. So that was the Russian equivalent. So he used that child saying about Biden, and actually that's the instrument he uses, the tool that sticks on you. So whatever people say about him, that sticks on other people. He put those labels on other people, the same thing. And the last tool, number 4, is just very simple hate speech. And as I said, the level of hate speech in Russia is unbelievable. I wrote an article, one of the articles for Voice of America. I compared the narratives in Rwanda during genocide in Rwanda and what kind of narratives they use now in Russia. And it's scary how they're similar, because they use the same tools and sometimes almost the same words, and sometimes it's very hard to realize to what extent the hate speech on Russian TV now is like blooming. It's almost in every program, and they let themselves say things they didn't let themselves say before the war. So you've heard about killing that very popular patriotic military blogger in Russia. He was giving a lecture in St. Petersburg, and some woman came to that lecture. She gave him a statue, like a figure statue, and there was a bomb inside, and so he was killed, and some people there were wounded. And he was one of the most popular military bloggers whose posts were like real fuel to that hatred and to hate against Ukrainian and Ukraine. I wanted to show you one short video, if you can help me, where he is saying this, like, we will kill everyone, we will rob everyone. So he used like real hate speech in his posts, and after that happened, I watched his Telegram channel a little bit, his videos, because of course I was not a follower of that blogger, so I just knew about him. So I decided to watch some of his videos, and he said words like, "This country should not exist," very straight, without any, this country should not exist. We need to. They are not. There is not only a group of Nazis. They are all like that. We need to annihilate them. So he used language like that in his videos.
Unfortunately, it got blocked again.
Okay.
It gets blocked.
Okay. I'm sorry.
Sounds like the counter informations.
Because it's related to this. Yeah. So, and one of the most famous quotes of him was, "We will kill everyone, we will rob everyone who needs to be robbed." And he said that phrase in Kremlin. After the ceremony, there was a ceremony when they annexed the 4 regions, new regions of Ukraine. There was a ceremony in Kremlin, and after that ceremony, he was filming himself, like doing video selfie, and he was smiling and saying, "We will kill everyone, we will rob everyone." So can you imagine in Kremlin, like after some government event, and where he was invited to, and he's saying he wants to kill people. If we can see it, it's okay.
No,
yeah.
it froze a bit.
Now it's okay. Maybe I shouldn't put those links here.
Yeah. We have to
Okay.
restart it again.
Okay, so talking about the hate speech, it's actually almost the end of my presentation. There was another a journalist, a TV host, Anton Krasovsky, who worked for RT, Russia Today, and who said in one of his interviews with a famous Russian writer who also supports Putin and the so-called special operation. And Anton Krasovsky said in this interview that Ukrainian kids should be burned in their houses and drowned and stuff like that. After that, he apologized and he said, "Oh, I was too emotional," and something like that. But the quote was already everywhere. And also one of the main propagandists of the regime, Vladimir Solovyov, who is a host, TV host of one of the most popular weekend TV shows. He said once, he says something like that all the time, but one of the most interesting and shocking examples for me was when he said that he compared that special operation with deworming a cat. He said when you take worms out of cat's body, for the worms, it's a war, but for the cat, it's liberation. So here we see the total dehumanization of people because he basically compared them to worms. That's exactly what they did in Rwanda when they compared people to cockroaches, and so the hate speech is blooming on Russian TV now, unfortunately, and even the intonations, the tone of the discussion, it has changed a lot during the last several years, not only after the war started, but maybe even earlier. People just yell at each other. They can't talk calmly. If you watch the Russian TV show, they yell, they call each other names, sometimes they would fight, and it's embarrassing to watch this. But what it does to people who are watching this kind of content almost every day, people start talking like that. And I noticed it by communicating to some people in Russia, because they speak with the same intonations, the same tone, they yell, and it's actually, it's very sad, so how it works. That's probably all I wanted to say. Let me check here. I'm sorry about the technical issues. Yes. I forgot, and I had very funny picture for you to show. I actually, by the way, that Solovyov, one of the main propagandists, by one of his cases, we can see how the hate speech and how propaganda can really work and kill people. Because in September, when they announced the mobilization, one of the narratives of the state TV was criticizing that mobilization. It might feel, you might think that it doesn't add up, but it does, because they wanted to show that they are fighting for like civil rights of people. They're propagandists. They are good people, and they don't want to people be taken to war without any reason, like against the law. Everything should be according to the law. And we will watch it. Margarita Simonyan, the head of Russia Today, was pushing that narrative, and Vladimir Solovyov. And Vladimir Solovyov, he is so-called turbo patriot. Patriot too much, patriotic too much. And he said in one of his shows, he said that I would just shot those military recruiters, commissioners, who are doing something against the law and who recruit people against the law. And you know what happened the next day in Irkutsk? A guy went to, he really shoot a military recruiter. So he gave that signal to people that aggression and violence are allowed. And why I was talking about the funny picture, because I wanted to tell a couple of words about one of the main people in Russian politics who are associated with the hate speech. It's Mr. Medvedev, former president, who runs his very popular Telegram channel, and he is known. Yes, he uses the language. You can't even I can't wrap my mind around that. Because where does he take all those words? He uses a lot of very offensive language against different political leaders, different countries. So the words they're just no words. You cannot use word vocabulary like that. And he uses all of them against Americans and Europeans, French people, German people, everybody. And this is the picture I wanted to show you. This is the Medvedev who was between Putin and Putin. So yes, I think we should wrap it up. I just wanted to. Yes, these are some 7 most common tricks of the trade used by successful propagandists, and named by the Institute of Propaganda Analysis. And we can find all of them in Russian media now. They use all of them. Here's another book. I'm actually going to heading to the end of the presentation, but I wanted to advise you to read this book as well if you find it in English. I know for sure about Dmitry Glukhovsky, but I'm not sure about this book. I just have read in my Ukrainian book club, and this is a book of a Ukrainian writer, Yaroslav Melnik. This is a dystopia. And I found very interesting how he described the role of the language in this book. So in this book, the fascism won. So the setting is like somewhere on a planet, and the Reich succeeded, and the fascists came to the power, but they are like so-called post-fascists, they're humanists. And they divided people into 2 different, not races, like types. One type is, of course, like a higher type, and the other one is the lower type. And they put those people from the second group in the barns, without clothes, without, like animals. And they made them live there like animals, and within several decades and centuries and even more, those people really turned into animals. Because if you live like this, like that, and you have kids, and those kids have kids, and so after several generations, you really like turn into animal. But why did they do that? And that's what I found very interesting, this idea of that book. They did it to call those people, like former people, they called them human-like creatures. And they started killing them and used them as like eating their meat, and so like cows or pigs. And they say, there is no problem, we are not killing people because we are killing human-like creatures. So it's the question of language, how you call your enemy or someone you don't like, and it gives you a pass to do whatever you want to that person or to that group of people. So they're not real people, they're just human-like creatures, they're animals. And very often it happens when propaganda calls different groups of people, put labels on them in different countries and in different eras. So that's what I wanted to say, and at the end, I wanted to answer a question: why is that propaganda is so successful? Because, as I said before, it didn't happen. It didn't happen like in one day. It was the situation was well prepared for that. They were gradually shutting down the independent media, and In the past year, at least 500, more than 500 Russian journalists from 27 media have moved abroad. So there is no independent media in Russia now at all, because it's just it's impossible to be independent according to the new laws they implemented after the war started. According to that law, you can use only the language they use. You cannot use the different language. And if you do, the criminal case can be opened against you, which happened with a lot of people, and they had to escape. Or some of them are unfortunately in prison or had huge fines or something like that. So that is maybe that's why it's so successful, because it's very well done, and they put a lot of effort in it for many years, and people are surrounded by that propaganda. They have no choice what to read, what to watch. And this choice is getting smaller and smaller. And I asked you to bring me a newspaper to show something. So the situation with the independent media in Russia, I like to compare it with some high school contest we had when I lived in Russia and I went to high school. That contest was for the parties. We used it for the parties. Dancing on a newspaper. Have you ever heard about that? So when you put a newspaper like that and you have several couples and they dance on a whole newspaper, then you fold it like that and you dance on a half of a paper. Then you fold it like that and you dance on a quarter. Then you fold it like that and you have a couple. And you have to dance on this and try not to fall down. And the winner is who is still staying on the newspaper. So that's what was happening with Russian media. We were trying to dance on the newspaper, but at some point there is no newspaper at all. So you need to leave country and be a normal journalist outside the country, or you have to, if you have to stay for some reasons, you have to obey those rules, and you cannot be a journalist anymore. You just can't keep journalistic standards anymore. So that's what I wanted to maybe to wrap it up with. Thank you so much for listening. If you have any questions, I'm try to answer them. I just a little disclaimer: I'm not a political analyst, so I would love to answer any questions related to language and to situation with media, but I cannot analyze like geopolitics and something like that. It wouldn't be correct. Yes.
So you've talked about high precision strikes, right? That actually hit Russian cities, right? Just 4 hours ago, I just checked the social media. There has been another high precision strike in the Russian city of Belgrade, where 3 Russian citizens were injured. That was a strike by Russia. It accidentally hit its own city. It happened like 5 hours ago. And so my question is, how often do these strikes by accident hit accidentally Russian cities at the border?
Oh, I don't know. To be honest, I don't know the statistics, so it's hard to say. But about the situation in Belgorod, by the way, they used a very specific phrase talking about that. I cannot translate it into English. Maybe you can help me. It was нештатный сход боеприпаса. They said нештатный сход боеприпаса happened. It's absurd. It's totally absurd. I cannot even translate it.
An unexpected drop of ammunition?
Something like that, but it's a very specific, like that official language. Yes, an unexpected. Нештатный. Yes.
Uncounted for?
Maybe. So they didn't say хлопок about that. They said unexpected drop of ammunition.
Well, I was thinking, is there hope in Russia in any way?
For media.
for media, for, but again, if you don't have, as member of a population, if you don't have any other view than the official view, and if you try to look outside of the country and then you are hit or threatened with the prison, what is the future for the person without the media?
Well, first of all, I wanted to tell you that I don't want you to think that all people in Russia are supporting the war, because there is a pretty significant part of the society who are against the war, but they are very scared and depressed, and they just can't express themselves. But some of them are still trying to do something, and now we don't have, in Russia, there is no mass protest at all, as you see, but there are some individual, very small individual protests, peaceful protests, like people would bring flowers to the monument of Taras Shevchenko, the most famous Ukrainian writer and poet in Moscow. And it's already a lot for Moscow, because they in Moscow they can arrest people even for a blank paper, and that happened several times. Like people were standing somewhere on the square with a blank paper. It's a referral to the very popular Soviet anecdote. Like a person was arrested for the blank paper, and when he asked why, they said, well, we understand everything. So they arrested a couple of people for blank paper and for just saying we want peace or something like that, very peaceful statements. So there is a protest like that to show something small, some small empathy, like gesture of empathy to Ukraine. It's already a lot, unfortunately, in this situation. And I just talked before traveling here, I talked to one of the Russian opposition politicians who is still staying in Russia. You know that one of the Russian oppositioners, Vladimir Karamurza, was sentenced to 25 years in prison. And after that, I talked to her. Her name is Yulia Galyamina. She is pretty well-known opposition politician in Russia, and her choice is to stay there. And a lot of people, they don't understand why people still want to stay there, because it's obvious they want to put everybody in prison, as they did with Navalny and with Ilya Yashin, who was another opposition leader, a friend of Boris Nemtsov, and now Vladimir Karamurza, 25 years, and she said, so she gave me two reasons. One reason I don't quite understand, and I don't share the same views as her. She said that I still believe that I can do something. There are like small elections and the little district elections or something like that, where you can win and you can change something, and you can make some small changes, like the theory of small steps, so-called. In my opinion, it's an illusion, but some people believe in that, and they are trying to change the situation. But another reason I think is very valid, because she told me that I want to stay here for people, because there are people who trust me, and I have some responsibility. And if I say, oh, my safety is above all, I don't care about you anymore, I will leave to another country. So for her, this is some kind of betrayal, and she doesn't want to do that. And she said that it's important now for people who are against war to feel that there are other people like them. I would agree with her about that, because I know my mom is still there, and it's very hard for her to still there with her views, because she feels she has this feeling of being surrounded by aggressive people who are like pro-war, and she appreciates a lot each time she meets someone who shares her views and beliefs. So this reason I can understand, and maybe it's really important. So that's what she told me. There are still people who are trying to make some changes and who are waiting for for regime to fall and for situation to change, and they believe, they think there is a hope, but it's very difficult to say if there is a hope, because now the situation is very, very difficult. It was not like that. It's maybe first time it's like that, and that's why people compare it to Stalin era, because even the sentences, the prison sentences, are like in Stalin era. So from that lower point, how Russia can get to like normal life again, I think it would be very, very difficult.
So what does really happen with the families of the people, of journalists who leave the country? Do they target their families?
Yes, some of their families, and I have friends, colleagues whose families were targeted. So they would come to their houses and make some searches and trying to scare people, and you know. By the way, I mentioned that Project Media, who that team who are making investigations, they relocated. They moved to the two main journalists of that team. They moved to the United States, by the way, and one is in Washington D.C., another one is in California. The founder of that project, with the families, because the families were threatened. So usually they try to move with the families, and if the relatives are still there, it's hard for them to work because of the relatives staying there. I'm talking about journalists who moved out in the last year after those new laws, because it's not that dangerous for me. For example, I moved many years ago. And I'm personally, as a person, I'm not labeled as a foreign agent. But a lot of people who moved out, Voice of America is labeled as a foreign agent, the whole organization. But the people, sometimes they label a person. And those people I was talking about, they labeled personally as foreign agent. So it's different for them, and also they are breaking the laws that were just implemented.
You know, I'm originally from Romania, very close to Russia. I know what this means to the people. But I think we have time just for one question. I saw your hand up, and then we will have to make some time for the next speaker, which is scheduled at 2.
Yes, now, I said now we got three groups. One is pro-war, anti-war, and maybe neutrals as well. So I was just wondering, what would be the best narrative to persuade that pro-war to be your group, or at least to be neutral?
This is a very good question, and there are those groups, as you noticed, the pro-war, anti-war, and the neutral group. And that neutral group is the biggest one, and actually it's the most dangerous group, because they just don't care. They are saying that kind of people who say like we want to be like far from politics. There are even jokes about that. There is an anecdote, two people in the police van are going somewhere, and one is asking, which concentration camp are we going to? And the other one is replying, I don't know, I'm trying to be out of politics. So they even have jokes about that kind of people. Because actually pro-war people, in my opinion, it's easier to turn them into anti-war, because when they see because they are pro-war, aggressively pro-war, they want some results, and when they see that there is no results, war is going and going, people are dying, and they're sending people to war, it's easier to turn them against the government than that neutral group that is like we don't care, we just want to post our cats and recipes on Facebook, and yes, there are a lot of people like that. And I talked twice in the beginning of the war, I mean several months after the war started, and recently to a researcher from, by the way, I think she's from here. She's based here. Natalia Solovyova.
St. Louis?
Huh?
St. Louis or the United States?
No, in Missouri. I think she's based in Missouri. I might be. Let me. I need to check. So she is sociologist, and she made, with her colleagues in Moscow, they made a research in Russia. They made a research They did like a huge poll. They asked people in Russia, people from all those three groups, and they figured out that that group was the biggest one. And after a year of the war, they made the same research, the same poll as well. They figured out they had a hope that the neutral group will decrease, so people would turn into like anti-war people. But they say it stayed the same. It stayed the same after the year of.
Well, I would like to listen to you for the next 2 days. if you have the
Oh,
time.
I'm sorry, I took a lot of time.
If you have the time. I know that when the subject is rich, you never want to end because it seems like you need to share. It happens to me many times when I talk about that part of the world. But thank you very much for okay. Again, let me draw very quickly while we prepare for the next speaker. Let me draw